For some context, this happened to one of my friends, which we'll call her Maddie for the sake of this story. Maddie was about maybe 22 at the time, and this took place in 2011. Maddie applied to a really good college, but the college that she went to was really hard to get in. But Maddie happens to be just lucky, so she got into the college without any problem whatsoever at all. As she was looking around at the library one day to find some good books, a guy happens to be walking at the same aisle of the books where she was. The man happened to be maybe around her age, and he introduced himself as Max. Max seemed to be very nice and offered to take Maddie's books and help her. He did this for the next few days, and Maddie thought he was fine. But something strange with him started to go on when Max asked Maddie if he could have her number. She greatly gave it to him without any hesitation. However, a few weeks gone by, and something really strange started to spark up with about Max. Max started to text Maddie certain messages like, "Hi, how are you?" to "Do you have a boyfriend?" and etc. Maddie ended up telling him that he needs to not ask that as she already has a boyfriend. But as this was going on though, the messages became more apparent than ever, and that's when Maddie ended up telling Max that he needs to leave her alone. But Max just kept bugging her over and over again about it. It wasn't long until Maddie decided to block his number and be done with him. However, the next day when she was at the library, basically looking at a book to check out for her project, Max appeared to be one of the aisles and he had somewhat was stalking her. He was stalking her through the school when she wasn't looking. The stalking became more apparent as he started staring at her door in their dorm at least the next few days later. This is when Maddie ended up calling the security of the school and they arrived, but they end up having some shocking news after Maddie explained about the Max situation. The security of the college said that Maddie apparently did not know this, but Max had been stalking other women in the college. He had gone so far as to take photos of them, most of them being really inappropriate. Maddie couldn't believe what Max did, and one of the pictures were found was a picture of Maddie sleeping in her own bedroom. Of course, Maddie had filed a restraining order against Max, and Max was never allowed to be in the college again as he got expelled. To this day, Maddie still has no idea why Max mainly targeted her and maybe a few other girls, but whatever he had was probably not good. And to Max, let's hope that you and Maddie never meet again. This happened in 2016 to one of my friends, which we'll call her Brittany for the sake of this story. Brittany attended a pretty good and very popular university, which most students go to. She needed to get a couple of bachelor's degrees so she can become at least, I guess you could say, a professor or something like that for a college. She was attending college that year and she had attended to a university 2 years ago. So she decided to attend college to get some degrees that she couldn't get at university. Either the universities that had that didn't have it, or they were hard to get in and she failed to get in. It was very unfortunate to say the least, but of course you could definitely say that Brittany manages to get into one popular one in a town that was located in the United States. So Brittany happened to be, in the campus area one day. She was with a couple of girlfriends that she knew. However, she was basically watching Netflix while just chilling when all of a sudden she heard a knock on the door. She thought that maybe it could be the pizza delivery guy, as she did order pizza with some of her friends. However, she walked up to see that there was this guy named Steve. Now, it was just a random guy that appears to be in college. Steve seemed to be very nice and asked Brittany a few questions like, is anyone in their dorm? Brittany immediately slammed the door at his face and locked it, didn't even bother to even open to talk to him. For some reason, Brittany had been feeling strange vibes about this dude named Steve. But something tells Brittany that this person, Steve, didn't seem to be looking very friendly. So, the next day, she was out to her classes when all of a sudden Steve showed up again, and he asked her if she wanted to go on a date with him. But Brittany declined, saying that she was much too busy and that she didn't have time for boys. But of course, Steve kept persisting Brittany over and over again. Then Brittany decided that she had enough and started to walk different routes to her classes, just so she could avoid Steve. And at first it seems to work out very well when it happened to be one night. Steve apparently wasn't in college, and he wasn't even a student in there when she filed a report to the security. Strangest things began happening, so Brittany ended up having just to grin and bear it for a little while. It wasn't long until suddenly the next day, Brittany saw Steve again, but this time he looked really weird. He even stared at her very awkwardly for at least a couple of minutes, and then he looked at her and then ended up giving her a really weird and creepy smile. Brittany honestly had no idea why Steve was there, but when she called the security came and then they took Steve away, but they found out that Steve had been really making girls uncomfortable in the college. He wasn't even supposed to be in college since he wasn't registered, but for some reason, he acted like he was a student. Of course, Steven was on probation from the college, and he never went there again. Still to this day, Brittany always thinks that maybe Steve was just trying to find someone to hang with, but Steve probably found the wrong place, and this never happened again since the rest of her stay. And it went so well with her getting a really good degree and all that, but she's never seen Steve again. So this actually happened to one of my friends, which we'll call her Melissa for the sake of the story. Melissa, however, used to having to take Uber and sometimes taxi, once in a while take the bus to get to certain places, because the reason is because she only had a G1 driver's license and she wasn't able to get G2 due to financial and even some personal reasons that I won't go into. Melissa one day was going to this party with her friends, but as they were too drunk to take her home since she didn't drink, she decided that she would walk home, but of course she decided to call Uber. When she called for Uber, she waited for what seemed to be a little bit, but then when it turns out, the Uber driver shows up and asks if she's the one who called. Since Melissa nodded yes, she ended up getting onto the car, and the man appeared to be driving to where her destination was. However, the place that this guy was driving her to wasn't the destination she had planned. She looked on her phone and she saw that her driver was there to pick her up. She ended up telling the man that she got on the wrong car, but the man didn't seem to respond. There was no childproof locks, so she was lucky enough that she ended up getting out of the car and run down the road. The man didn't even bother to stop and chase her. He just stopped for a minute and then just kept going. But Melissa was lucky that she went back to her house and called Uber and explained about what happened. It turns out that driver was not an Uber driver, and it turns out it was someone who really did messed up stuff. So it turns out that this dude, however, was trying to lure young girls into his car and taking them away to certain places that they wouldn't even know where. But however, to this story, Melissa still is not sure what could have happened if she had not got out of that car. Chances are this man could have done something horrible to her. And the rest of her college went out very well. And however, though, one day she was walking to class, that same car always pulled up near the college. But it's been like that for at least a few days, but then it ended up not being there anymore. So as of that Melissa has never took Uber again and only accepted rides from friends and or took taxis or the city bus or and etc. She eventually got her driver's license sometime in 2017, her G2 test. Well, G2 license, so she didn't have to worry about driving but walking or anything like that anymore. And she never used Uber again. And I think she's grateful that she got out okay. If it weren't for the locks that were not childproof, chances are she would not have made it out alive. This took place in what seemed to be in Calgary in Alberta, and this happened to be one of my friends named Kyla at the sake of the story. Kyla was probably around maybe 20 at the time of the story, and this happened sometime, I guess, in 2013. Kyla was taking a course related to animals such as veterinary experiences, such as vet tech. So, she was studying vet tech at the time of the story. However, there was this one little assignment on a field trip that her class had assigned her to do was to take pictures of some animals and stuff in the woods, mainly wildlife or even any wildlife plants in general. So Kyla was taking photos of certain things with her phone, and this project was and field trip was pretty much 30% of her grade. So as she was taking a look at the forest, she ended up deciding to go deeper in the forest, seeing whatever stuff she could find. It wasn't long until she heard something in the distance. It sounded like someone was crying. She ended up looking around, but she couldn't find anyone who was crying. But it sounded like it came from a little girl. This honestly almost put Kyla on risk, so she ended up following the sound. She thought that maybe there might have been a child lost, and if there was, she would have reported it to the authorities and possibly the rangers of the park. But however, when she got closer, this is to the sound. She ended up realizing that it was on a loop. She had no idea if there was somebody there trying to lure unsuspecting people. But she ended up going back the way she came, and she never returned to that place. She didn't even bother reporting it to the teachers, as she was afraid she would get into major trouble, and she didn't want to report it to anyone, thinking that they wouldn't believe her. Of course, she would have done it anyway, but she was afraid that she would go into major trouble. But in that forest path that she goes down walks with her friends after college, she's never heard that crying again. She does not know if that was actually somebody trying to lure her down to their trap, or if there was actually a girl. It wasn't long until she heard that again, maybe at least a week later, when she finally decided to report it to the authorities and even the park rangers about a missing child. They looked around the forest area, but they could never find that crying child. And it turns out there was no crying child. So, since the crying was on a loop, it appears to be that somebody was indeed trying to lure people into his or her trap. Still to this day, Kyla is still not sure about why this person decided to try to do this to lure people. But she's never heard that cry or even had that experience again since.